We now join our regularly scheduled...
My name is Hermann Schmidt, and I've been asked to give my testimony of the things that happened in my life, things that brought me to where I'm at today. And first thing I want to say is I don't believe in luck. There's no such thing as luck. Everything is known by God, controlled by God, and everything that happens is according to His ordination, and as far as He allows it to happen. Now, I also don't. There's a lot of sufferings in everybody's life. We all have sufferings. None of us go through this world without suffering, because that's part of the fallen nature. We all bring our own suffering, and also because of other people's sins, we suffer a lot. But the good news is that God uses all things for good. That there's a reason for suffering, and God would not allow any suffering of any kind if He could not use it for good. God allows suffering because He loves us. And I don't have time to go into it right now, but just know that God is with us in all our sufferings, and He uses it all to bring us all closer to Him, and for the good of His kingdom. Now, when I give my testimony, I really like to start with my people of my past, my parents, my grandparents, because they had a lot to do with the way I am today. So they're really part of my whole testimony here. Now, I'm going to talk first about my family, my mother's side. They were called the Riesers. The Riesers. Rieser in German means giant. And this was back in Yugoslavia, in Croatia, what is now known as Croatia. And they were a God-loving family. And they loved God, and they just surrendered to His will, and everything they did was for the honor and glory of God. And God worked in their lives. They trusted God, they loved God, and God worked in their lives. And just like in my great grandmother, she was almost blind. She had thick glasses, and the doctors told her, no, it won't be a matter of time before she would be completely blind. And of course, my family, they prayed over her. My grandma and grandfather, they prayed over her. And one day, one of my uncles was coming home from, I don't know if it was a fish trip or a hunting trip, I forget which one, coming home late at night from his trip, and knocked on the door. And my great grandma opened the door, and my uncle says, well, "Where are your glasses at?" And she says, "Well, I'm wearing them." And she touched her face, and they weren't there. And she had good sight from then on. And the doctor told my great-grandmother that it's pretty rare for that to go away on its own. Of course, in those days, you're talking about a long time ago, they didn't have the medical expertise we have nowadays. Now, my grandfather, he was a singer. He gave concerts all over Europe. Of course, in those days, he had horses and a coach, drawn coach. And one day, he was coming home from one of his concerts. He was pretty close to home. He was going across this bridge, and they blew up at the bridge, and he got killed. What they were doing, that they was trying to assassinate some political figure, and you know, that's how World War I got started. The Archduke of Austria got killed in Yugoslavia, and I don't know what the particular figure they was after, but anyway, this political figure had a coach just about like my grandfather's. But he came along later. But anyway, he got killed in that incident, and so they left my grandmother on her own with 12 kids to raise. And of course, you know, there was rough times to begin with. There was a lot of hunger in those times, and people had a hard time making ends meet in those days. And there was my grandmother with 12 kids to raise. So with all the money that she could gather up, she bought a grocery store. And in the grocery store, she would people would come in, and when people that were hungry, didn't have money, and she'd let them charge out the food, knowing that she would never get it paid back. She knows she would never get the money back from some of those people, but she let them charge it out anyway because she cared for them, because the love of God was in her heart. And even though her own family didn't have much, and we barely got by. And one thing about my grandmother, as busy as she was, you can imagine raising 12 kids and running a grocery store. Every day she took out an hour of her life and went into a room and closed the door. And all the kids knew when she was in the room, she had better not be disturbed unless it was an emergency. And for an hour she prayed to God. She had time every day for an hour to talk to God and pray. And now my mother, she wanted to go to a convent. She thought she had a religious vocation, but my grandmother wouldn't sign for her to go in. She figured when she was old enough she could go on her own, make her own decision on that. But she didn't want to just sign it, it was too much. Sure, my mom made the right decision. Anyway, when my mother was about 18 years old, she was skating on a lake, and she was skating on some thin ice, and she broke through the ice. And it took her a long time to fish her out. And what the mother told me, what they told her is her clothes were completely froze stiff by the time they got her to a doctor. And it was a miracle she survived. Miracle she survived that. And she was in bed for a long time. I know one day when I was visiting my mother, we kind of sat there and kind of figured out just how long she was in bed. And his mother said she must have been close to about 9 months she was laying in bed. And every day the doctor came in and told my grandmother the same thing. Says, we don't understand why she's alive. Medically speaking, it's impossible for her to be alive. She can't, because my mother had a high fever and she had so many other things wrong with her. And the doctors kept saying, medically speaking, we don't understand why she's alive, but she was alive. Anyway, one day my mom had a dream, and she heard Mary's voice. And Mary told my mother everything that would ever happen to her in her whole life. Like she would marry a soldier who would leave and never return. She would have this big bicycle accident in Germany, and she would have go across the ocean and start a new life. She'd be thrown in a death camp, and everything that ever had major turning point in life, Mary told her about it. And when Mary told her about the death camp, my mom got real scared and says, Mary, I don't want to suffer this. And Mary says, you will come to a crossroads. If you turn right, you'll be saved. If you turn left, you'll be captured. And the last two things Mary told us, she says, I want you to pray for every person God puts in your life. I want you to pray for them. And the last thing she told me was, you will be healed. Just then my mom woke up. Mom woke up, and when she woke up, she see Mary standing at the foot of her bed. And she was explaining to me the clothes she wore and everything. And my mom was just beaming, filled with joy. And her mother was in the room with her. And her mom noticed my mom was also beaming and full of joy, and she couldn't understand what's going on. She looked at my mother, and she looked at the wall, my mother and my wall, and she didn't see Mary. My mom did. And she didn't understand what was going on. But that very night, my mom's fever broke. And a week later, she was healed, completely healed out of bed. Now, again, like I say, I don't believe in luck. Things didn't just happen that way. Everything happens for a reason. Now, my father, he was in a seminary, and he wanted to be ordained, and his greatest desire was to preach the word and bring the sacraments to the people. But his mother, my grandmother Schmidt, she wanted him to come out of seminary because he was the only one to carry on the name. So after a while, just to please her, he came out of the seminary. And every day he would go to Mass. And every day he would hear this person singing up in the choir loft. And kept asking people, who is that person? Who is that person? So finally, my dad and my mother were introduced, and a few years later they were married. Anyway, when they were, shortly after they were married, my mother and father went to Germany because he went to college there. He got a degree in engineering degree. But while he was in Germany, before I get to this part, when he was in Germany, he brought my mom a new bike, and one day they went up to the mountain, my mom and another couple, and my dad, of course, and they were bicycling. My mom was kind of showing off. She was at this, I don't know how many speeds this bike had, but it's one of the latest models. And just going down this mountain just as fast as she could, and just way ahead of the other three people. And in Germany, the farmers used to have caves dug out in the side of the mountain where they kept their farm wagons in. And as she was zipping down through the road there, this farmer pushed this wagon out on the pavement. And he's supposed to look before he did it, but he didn't. And Mom hit the wagon, and what she told me was she actually somersaulted over the wagon and down the cliff. And it caught her. And of course she was wearing those bicycle skirts they used to wear in the old days. And she went down feet first. The wind kind of caught her bicycle skirt, and she was hooked on a marker on the side of the cliff, and she was holding on to her skirt and her marker, and they had to call I suppose the fire department to get her off of there, and then they lowered the ladder down to her, and the firemen tried to get her to come on the ladder. My mom wouldn't let go of her skirt because the skirt kept ripping. It was almost it's only, she said, only about a 1/4 inch lift on the seam, the very end of the seam, which hasn't torn, and she was scared to let go of it, so he grabbed her, and they finally got her out of there. And she was pretty well in shock. She didn't break anything, but she had some bruises, but she was in shock. And the reason I know about this story is because me and Mom went through some of her pictures in the old days, and this one picture, I looked at her, she was all pale. And I asked Mom, "Gee, you look really sick there." And Mom says, "Yeah, that was the first day I was up after that accident." And so she had quite a life in there. Anyway, there was in Germany, the Nazis came into power, and my dad hated the Nazis, so they moved back to Croatia. And when they moved back to Croatia, things have really changed. My mom told me they was really surprised that how the Nazis infiltrated the whole area. And then says in a lot of these buildings, the big Nazi flags were hanging out the windows and stuff. And the Nazis were recruiting people to go off to war. And my dad and my mom and another couple decided he was going to go to Switzerland to get away from him. Well, just about at that time, my grandmother got real sick, and my dad wouldn't leave her. Now, this other couple, they went to Switzerland and they were saved, but my dad, by the time my mom got better, my grandmother got better, he was caught. I mean, they told him that he had to join the army, the German army, and they didn't want to, but they gave him a choice, either join or we'll shoot you. That's the choice you had. So he went into the army, and they sent him to Russia. And in one of those big battles, he was killed. He was killed in one of those big battles. And I was born 1 month before he was killed. And my mom sent him pictures and wrote about me. And several weeks after he was killed, we got his last letter. We got his last letter to Mom. And he said he was so excited he couldn't wait to get home. He couldn't wait to get home. He was so excited to see me. And anyway, when I was born premature. It's what they call a blue baby. Now, of course, this was many years ago, and I didn't have all the medical stuff they have nowadays. And the doctors told my mom to take me home because there's nothing they could do for me. They'd take me home and die is what they told my mom. But there was a young doctor there that he just got out of medical school not too long ago, and he knew how to get a hold of an incubator, and he knew what they were and how to get a hold of one. So I asked my mother if he could just try and put me in one and see what happens. And of course, Mom agreed. So I eventually pulled through. Oh boy, that was really lucky, I was really lucked there, I tell you. Anyway, when I was about 2 years old, we had some of my cousins staying with us in Yugoslavia, in Croatia there, and their parents lived in Hungary, but they were staying us for a little while. And the Russian troops, the armies was coming down to the Balkans, and when they were coming down, they were closing up all the borders. And so we knew we had to get those young people, kids, back to their mom before well, we still could. So I don't know how this happened, but they got a hold of the underground. Mom, my grandparents got a hold of the underground, the resistance movement, and they agreed. I don't know why they would agree to do this, but they agreed to smuggle my mom and my cousins, and my mama took me with her. There's something else I don't understand, but God knows why. God has a reason for everything. But they smuggled us across the border to Hungary, And we smuggled us across, and they said, hurry back, you know. And then as soon as my mom got to her sister's house in Hungary, her sister wouldn't even let her in the door. She says, hurry up, go back, go back. The longer you wait, the tighter the borders will be sealed. So my mom went back, and she met the resistance people, and they started going back across the border to Yugoslavia, but they were caught. Now, we don't know what happened to those people, those men in the resistance movement. But my mom says she thinks that they shot them, but we don't know for sure. But they threw Mom and me in this Russian death camp, and everybody in that camp was there for one reason only: to die. And Mom says those were the cruelest people in the world that you can think of. Every man was a law to himself. When she got in it, they gave her an armful of straw for her bed, and they took her to a place a building that had no roof, no ceiling, no windows, no doors. It's just a windbreaker, is what it was, a little windbreaker, and that's where me and my mom stayed. And that they worked my mom from sun up to sundown in heavy labor, real heavy labor, and all she got one sandwich. Now, there was a Russian soldier there. He was different than all the other ones. He was really stood out, and he would bring me his ration of milk every day, a glass of milk every day. And shortly after I was in there in the camp there, Mom would come where I was at after a day's work. Instead of getting a sleep, which she needed real bad, because she didn't have much time for it, she didn't get some sleep. She would hold me in her arms, and she would cradle me, and she would take this glass of milk and pour it into my mouth and try to make me drink. But shortly after I was in there, I got so sick I couldn't even swallow the milk. I couldn't drink the milk. And she says she would pour the milk in my mouth. The milk just kept coming outside of my mouth because I couldn't even swallow it. Now, how did I survive? God knows. God knows. There's no doubt in my mind that the only reason me and my mom got through this is because of God's strict intercession. As a matter of fact, my mom told me we lived there longer than anybody else. And of course, I don't think she got a hold of any records or anything, but I think she just seen people around her die off all the time. We made a couple of attempts to escape. This just shows you that when you're in a position like that in a death camp, it brings out the worst and the best of people. Now there was a young couple that was going to escape, and they asked me and Mom if we wanted to go with them. But they knew if they took us with them, that it would decrease the chances of making it. But this is, again, like I say, they kind of laid their lives on the line for that, and they tied me to my mom's back, and they put a gag around my mouth so I couldn't scream and stuff. And I was doing pretty good, except for some reason I was able to get that gag loose or something, and then I started crying, and then we were discovered. And my mom says all heck broke loose then, because they said that she actually felt the bullets, the heat of the bullets go past her head. She actually felt the heat of the bullets going past her head, you know. And we were captured, and it says everybody got a real good beating, real sound beating. She said they tried to escape a couple of times. And this needs to be said. There's the soldier I was talking about, this Russian guard. People knew what section of fence he would walk every day. And of course, on this, they had a fence line, and nobody inside the fence was allowed to go near that fence, or they would be armed with shot. And same on the other side, it was all cleared off. Anybody even came into the clearing was shot. No questions asked. There was only a shot. Anyway, when this Russian soldier was walking the fence line, some people inside the camp knew people outside the camp, and they would sneak food across to the people inside the camp. Because when this particular Christian soldier, my mom said he was Catholic. When this Catholic soldiers seen and people come up to send food across, he would turn his back and walk the other way. Now he was only there for a very short time, just for a couple 3 weeks, and then all of a sudden he disappeared. Now we don't know what happened to him, but Mom and I don't think nothing good happened to him. I think he was probably discovered, and I probably paid the ultimate price for his generosity. But we don't know for sure. Also, that there's a one time my mother and another lady was working close to the fence and see a man on the other side of the fence. They motioned him for to come over. They come on over. They asked him to come on over. And he kept motioning to come over, and they wouldn't come over. And they kept saying to each other, "I wonder why the guards don't see him. I wonder why the guards don't see him." They was kind of astounded. So eventually they did go over, and he handed some food across. And so this happened about 3 or 4 times. Three or four times, he said. And at the last time that happened, this lady told my mom, you know, I think he's an angel. And mom says, no, he's not an angel. He's not an angel. And anyway, but the last time that happened, he handed some food across to my mom and this other lady. And my mom turned around to go back. And then she said she wanted to ask this guy something. She just turned around. He took one step and turned around, and he was gone. And then my mom realized, yes, this man was definitely an angel. And anyway, it says he didn't really give us enough food to stay alive for being in camp that long. But of course, every little bit helps. And now, why didn't the angel just come where we was at? I don't know, but God knows. And maybe it's because the other people would have seen it and took the food away from us. I don't know. But there's a reason everything happens. And anyway, one day, everybody woke up in the camp, and the guards were gone. All the guards were gone, and some civilians came and opened the gates and started releasing people. And of course, you know, I don't know how much if my mom heard correctly or not, or what you understood, but what you understood was that the Americans were in the area, and that they were releasing the camp. Now I don't know if they actually meant the troops were in the area, or if they had some kind of influence on the Russians or something. But the Americans had something to do with them releasing the camp. So they entered the camp and they sent my mom and me to a hospital in Vienna, Austria. And mom was in there for several months. She was really in bad shape. She was all skin and bones, just skin and bones. You know, when she came into the camp, she was overweight. She was fat and overweight. When she went left, she was skin and bones, and she was very sick, very sick. And she eventually she got healed physically, but emotionally and mentally, she was never really healed, because even close to her death, when I talked to my mom, she said she still had nightmares. She still had nightmares at night about the camp. So emotionally, she was never the same again. Now my my stepdad, he was also raised in about the same area that I was at, me and my mom was at. He was at a different town, in Bajka Blanka, where he was from. It wasn't a short distance from where we lived at, but somehow he made it to Vienna too. Now his wife was killed in the Russian death camp, and the Russians had him tied to a tree, and he watched him as they killed his mother. And I don't know if my stepdad said anything or what happened, but a Russian soldier came over and just started beating him in the face with his rifle butt, knocked all of his teeth out. Can you imagine someone knocking you in the face with a rifle butt, and his face was probably swollen, probably broke his nose, and knocking all of his teeth out. I mean, you can't imagine it. I mean, this is the kind of people that you are dealing with. If there's no God, you're alone to yourself. If there's no God, there's no right and wrong. You know, if the Russians did their best to kill God, and a lot of people were affected by their theology. And then, of course, if there's no God, there's no right and wrong. You know. So anyway, I needed to bring that up. And my stepdad was really kind of a rascal. Maybe it's what happened to him during the war might have something to do with it too. But I think it goes deeper than that. Anyway. My mom didn't want to marry him, but he wanted her to marry him. And my grandmother was there, and my grandfather was also there at Vienna there at that time, and so as my aunt. And they talked my mom into marrying him. Finally talked my mom into marrying him. My mom says that was the biggest mistake she ever made in her life. She didn't know that there was so much difference between my dad and my stepdad. They was completely opposites. My stepdad was so loving and to her and gentle for her, caring for her, and my stepdad was complete opposite. My stepdad, he started running around on her just after they were married, you know, around other women. He was drinking, and he was spending all his money on booze and restaurants, and he would beat my mom, constantly beat my mom, and even beat me all the time too. That my mom says, I've landed in the hospital several times because of his beatings. It was so terrible. Of course, in those days they looked at it differently. A man was kind of in charge of his family, you know, and people didn't interfere with that. And anyway, you know, so many people complain nowadays that they're not noticed, they're not loved. But me, my philosophy was out of sight, out of mind. I didn't want anybody to notice me. I didn't want anybody to even know I'm around, you know, because of stepdad primarily. And anyway, I gotta hurry up and go along with this. Eventually, we had a chance to. Oh, I do want to say one thing before I leave Europe. When I was in Europe, when I was a little kid, I had a lot of faith, and I don't know. I just did. I just believed in prayer. I remember one time when I was just a little kid, my half sister, me and her was at church. It was a Sunday. It was at church, and of course she was several years younger than me. And I prayed that we go to the zoo because we hardly ever went anywhere. We hardly ever went anywhere because we didn't have the money. Because we lived in two different places in Vienna, and each of them was a schoolroom with several people in it, with no curtains or anything. And of course with on one floor there'd be the girls' restroom, another floor the men's restroom, and the cooking facilities were all downstairs in the basement, and you know, stuff like that. Anyway, so. We just barely got by. As a matter of fact, remember 2 or 3 times we got care packages from the United States. My family did. And anyway, so I prayed that we would go to the zoo. And I remember after Mass, we went out and was just going down the steps of the church. And I told my sister, let's hurry up and go home. We're going to the zoo today. And my little sister was kind of snotty and said, well, how do you know? How do you know we're going to the zoo today? And of course, all kinds of people were around there looking at us. And I didn't want to admit that I prayed. So I lied and I said, well, Mom told me. Well, Mom didn't tell me. Mom didn't tell me he was going to zoo. I prayed, you know. And then when we got home, as soon as we walked in the door, Mom says, hurry up, let's have some breakfast. We're going to the zoo today. Well, that worked out pretty good. Anyway, also I need to mention that when I was about 5 or 6 years old there in Europe, I was still very undernourished, and I was very sick, very sickly. So they decided to send me to Switzerland to try and regain my health. So they sent me to Switzerland for a few months, for most of a year. And when I was there, when I first got there, I was at this camp where a lot of little kids were at, but I was only there for about a week or 10 days. But after that, I lived in 2 different families in Switzerland. I lived for several months, and they're trying to get me to restore my health back again. And when they came back, then my mom and my stepdad moved to another place, and there was the same kind of conditions. So anyway, my stepdad. Now I don't want to. There's a reason I'm telling you this about my stepdad, because in the end it's got a fairly good outcome. But I want to know where he was at. And my stepdad never really changed. Even in the United States, when he came to the United States, he was still running around with other women. And we even know that he had another child by some other woman. And he didn't care what happened to us. All he cared about is having money for his booze and for his girlfriends. And I remember my mom worked at school where he was janitor at, and it's another job. And she used the money to pay the rent. And my stepdad at times got real mad at her for paying the rent, because he says, I don't care if you guys live out the streets. I don't care if you lose the house or not. You know, because he had some place to go. You know, that's the kind of guy he was. But the reason that I'm telling you this is because if I have time, it'll come in later on in my testimony here. Now, when I went coming over, I didn't. The United States, I was like 8 years old, and I didn't know hardly any English. And of course, I went to school. And because of my accent, and because I wore those funny clothes, you know, with little lederhosens and stuff, you know, on the shirts and everything, you know, and the kids used to harass me, make fun of me all the time. And I wore a backpack and went to school. Now, all the kids wear backpacks nowadays, but in those days, in the late 40s and the early 50s, there were no such thing as backpacks in the United States. They had them in Europe, but not in the United States. So everybody made fun of me for wearing a backpack, you know, also. And I guess I was just kind of a trendsetter, you know, because later on, all the kids were wearing backpacks a few years later. But anyway, I was real mean. I was real angry. I grew up real angry and mean. I mean, I didn't even realize how angry I was inside, how depressed I was. And I remember it didn't take much for me to get in a fight. Any little thing would set me off, and I would get in a fight. And I remember just before I graduated from high school, I was walking down the hall with this girl, and this girl says, "Herman, don't you ever smile." And I remember the same thing when I was in the service. When I was in the service, and I was at this one battalion. Then after we went to Vietnam and come back, the sergeant in my platoon, he could transfer somewhere else. But about a year later, I seen him just before I got out of service, and he said, "Herman, don't you ever smile." And the reason I remember that, because it kind of shocked me that people, and as I look back now, they were probably right. I probably didn't smile because I was pretty had low self-esteem and depressed and angry. But anyway, I remember when I got my job in Marshalltown, Iowa, about 20 years ago. I was going out to the parking lot. This guy had just retired. This machinist had just retired. Oh, I guess it was maybe 15 years ago. This guy has just retired, and we had a party for him. And he was walking with me to the parking lot after work. And he said, "Herman, don't you ever smile?" And it just kind of stuck to my mind. I guess I was. One thing I can't say for where I was at in Europe, even at school, in grade school, in high school, wherever I was at, there was always one or two people God sent to my life that were very, very close to me. I mean, wherever I was at, even in the service, there's always a couple of people or more was always very close to me, And I think that God sent into my life because I needed someone else, to be close to me, and I really believe there's God's hand in working in my life. One thing I want to say, when I was in the service, because I didn't have this relationship with God, I would still go to church. But I would say about 2 or 3 sentences of prayer a day at night before I went to bed. It wasn't much. Maybe, like I said, 2 or 3 sentences a day was about it. But one thing I would always pray is, "Lord, give me more faith. Lord, give me faith." And I remember a couple of times I actually stopped after I said that, and I actually almost said it out loud. Why am I saying this stupid prayer for? Why am I saying this stupid prayer for? I have faith. I mean, I didn't realize that I didn't really have faith. I mean, you don't realize until you have faith that you don't have faith. At least that's the way it was with me. And but I kept saying this prayer every night, "Lord, give me more faith," even though I thought it was a stupid prayer. For some reason, I said it, and of course, it was the Holy Spirit moving my heart to say it every day. And of course, God always answers those kind of prayers. And so many times when I was in the service, I came really close to killed. And I know it was only by God's hand that I got out of those situations. There were several times, and I know God was watching over me, even at times when I was separating myself from God by sin. God was still watching over me. He still loved me, and He still was taking care of me. And and of course, I didn't realize this till many years later. Of course, then I got out of service and I got a job in Marshalltown, Iowa as a machinist. And I worked at a shop up there for 28 years in that shop there. And of course, when I was there, I would still go to Mass before they had vigil Mass, we would go to early Mass on Sundays at 5 o'clock, and then my work would start at 7 o'clock. So I would get just enough time to go to Mass, go to the shop and change my clothes, put my dirty boots on, dirty clothes on, and go to work. But later on, when they had vigil Masses, then I would go on Saturday. But of course, I never had Saturday and Sundays off because it takes a lot of years, seniority, before you get Saturday and Sunday off. As a matter of fact, when I retired after 36 years as a machinist. I only had Sunday, Monday off. I never had Saturday and Sunday off, even at the end there. So anyway, for all those years, I had either Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and I remember I had Wednesday, Thursday off for about 17 years straight or so. Anyway, but when my days off, I would go to Mass in the morning. On my days off, plus on Saturday evening. And I would be involved in everything in church that I could be involved in. I was still more or less going through the motions. I still didn't have this love relationship with our Lord. I was just more or less going through the motions, you know. And I would be involved in everything that they were speakers brought in. I would go to that. If they had a conference, I would go to that. And I was involved in religious education from grade school through high school, confirmation, and everything for about 25 years over there. But anyway, all things changed. Remember when I said God answers prayers, especially prayers of faith. If you want more faith, Jesus said, "Knock and the door will be open to you." And I kept on knocking and knocking and asking for more faith. And I was still saying that prayer. As a matter of fact, I still say that prayer even today. I ask God to give me more faith, because you can never have too much faith. Anyway, one day I would go to confessions once a month, and I'll go to Mass 3 times a week. But one day, after several years, about 15 years ago, I went to confession. And it was different than any other time. I went to confession, and all of a sudden I felt the power of God in a very powerful way. I felt totally cleansed. I felt like Jesus was holding me in his arms. I can't explain it. It was just different than any other time. And I felt just tremendous peace inside me. Then I remember 2 weeks later I went to confession again, and the same thing happened. And that Sunday I went to Mass. And when I went to Mass and received Jesus in the Eucharist, I was filled with joy and peace. I was so filled with God's joy I couldn't hardly contain it. My whole face literally tingled. And you know what I mean? It's like 1,000 needles in my face. My face literally tingled. And I would go home singing hymns of praise. And of course I took my kids to Mass with me. I had 4 kids, by the way. Took them to Mass with me, and to bring them home. And I would go home singing praises, God's praises. Now this would go on. This went on for several years. When I felt such great joy coming home from Mass and great exuberance, and I would sing, you know, and even at the dinner table after Mass, I would sit at a table at supper, and all of a sudden a hymn of praise would come out of me, and my wife would say, "Shut up! You don't sing at the table," you know. And my wife even told me. Now, my wife wasn't Catholic at that time, and she didn't go to church generally, and she says, a couple of times she told me, "Herman, you're a completely different person when you come home for church. You're completely different. You're completely changed." And I remember one time I was coming home from work. This was on a Saturday, and usually on a Saturday I would have a quick cup of coffee, take a shower, and then go to church, go to Mass, with the vigil Mass. But this Saturday I got in an argument with a guy, and this guy really got me really angry. I was really angry at this guy. Now, I don't know what the argument was about. I don't even know who the guy was anymore. I just don't know. But I know I was really angry. I still remember that. I was really angry at this person. I was so angry, I figured, no, I couldn't go to church, because I was too angry. My heart wasn't right. I knew my heart wasn't right. So when I got home, I sat at a table and drank a cup of coffee, and I kept sitting there. And my wife says, "Aren't you going to church? Aren't you going to get clean up, go to church?" I says, "No." I said, "I'm too angry. My heart isn't right." Because I remember what it says in Scripture, if you have something against your fellow man, go make peace with him, and then come back to the sacraments, then come back to church. And I remember that, and I knew my heart was right, because I was so angry at this person yet. My wife says, "No, go Herman, go to church. You'll be different. You'll be different when you go to church, and God will transform your heart." I says, "No, I'm not going. My heart is not. I'm not going to be a hypocrite. I'm not going to church." My wife says, "You're going to church." Anyway, we were arguing back and forth for a couple of minutes, and finally, just to get her off my back, I says, "Okay, I'm going to church." So I went upstairs, I took a shower, went to church, and I remember when I was at Mass, I said, "Lord, forgive me. Forgive me, I'm angry. Take this anger out of my heart. Take this anger out of my heart. Because help me to forgive this person. Take this anger out of my heart. Help me to love this person. You know, forgive me for my anger." Excuse me. I remember at Mass, he started to heal my heart. Then when I went to receive Jesus in the Eucharist, his love just overflowed in me. He took this anger out of my heart. And I remember I was coming home, brought the kids home, and I was walking the door, I was singing hymns of praise. Mm-hmm. And my wife was kind of snotty, said, "See, I told you. you know, and it just, the grace of God, the sacraments, completely transformed my heart of stone into a heart of flesh. Completely transformed me. And for years and years, I just kept singing after Mass, and all these years I kept coming closer, closer to God, kept getting more and more joy, kept getting more and more healed. And one day I remember reading in the bulletin about they was going to have a charismatic conference at church. And of course I didn't know anything about it. And of course, like I said, I always went to all the conferences they had. But there's something about the conference that didn't seem right. You know, I remember I called up this person on the telephone, the number in the bulletin to call. It says, you know, this isn't like the Holy Rollers, is it? And I don't know what she told me, but she told me something that kind of satisfied me, thinking, okay, I'm going to it, you know. And so anyway, I went to it. And of course, the first few days was all right. It was very good, you know. It was a whole week. At the end of the week, they would pray over you. Anyway, the whole week. And I remember thinking by the third or fourth night there, the people that already belonged to it started praising God in the spiritual prayer, in tongues, so praying God in tongues. And of course, the whole room was full of people. Most of the people, you know, that went to the conference to be prayed over. And I was so embarrassed. I would have walked out right then and there, but I didn't want to get up and have people notice me walking out. So I just stayed there. But anyway, I stuck with it. And at the end of the week, my little group leader, we all formed the small groups, she prayed over me. And eventually I was baptized in the Holy Spirit. And so I would go to prayer meetings on every Wednesday night. I'd go to prayer meetings. And after prayer meetings on Wednesday nights, they have a little room in the back we call a prayer room. And a couple would go in there, different couples every week, and they would pray over people for different healing. And at that time, my feet were really sore. As a matter of fact, I was actually limping around. I was limping around for quite a long while, and with sore feet. And I figured, why not? So I went in there and went to the prayer room and says, yeah, what do you need? And I says, yeah, my feet are real sore. So they had a bench there. Says, lay down on the bench. And he took my shoes off. He stretched my feet out. This man did. And he says, well, no wonder. He says, your one leg is a quarter inch longer than the other one. Because, I don't know if it was or not, but that's what he said. So him and his wife prayed over me. If they prayed over me, and after they got through praying over me, he measured my legs again and says, well, they're all even now. Now, I don't know if my legs was actually longer, one leg was actually longer than the other one, but I do know one thing. My feet were healed. They didn't limp around anymore. Anyway, I'm getting close. Anyway, I was not always the best husband to my wife. I mean, I didn't hurt her as far as beating her or anything. I didn't. Everything she wanted, anytime she wanted to do something, I did it with her. And did it. If they wanted to go somewhere, we went. Everything she wanted, I gave her. But the thing is, I took her for granted. I didn't tell her I love you or anything like that because I figured she should already know that. You know, and my wife's going through depression. Wife's going through really bad depression, and it really hurt me a lot to see her that way. And it hurt. And when she was going through depression, it affected me, and I was going through depression a lot of times. And I didn't know just how badly she was suffering. Anyway, one day I come home from work, and there was a note on the table. Her and the kids were gone. There's a note on the table, and she said she was getting a divorce. Her and the kids went to her mom's place. She was getting a divorce, and then it really hurt me. It really hurt me. I mean, I was going to the depths of depression. I was going to the depths of darkness, which I've never known before. I've never hurt like this in my whole life. I remember I was sitting there and I was just in shock. And I went over to the refrigerator, got me a beer, opened up the beer, took it in the living room, set it on the coffee table and sat in the living room. I never took a sip out of that beer because I was so sick. I was so physically, emotionally sick. I knew that if I ever took a sip out of that beer, I would throw it up right away. I knew I was so sick, I knew I didn't even dare to take a sip out of that beer because I was so sick. You know, and it really bothered me. All that I was sitting there, I said, boy, wife, she's going to suffer. She's going to be sorry. And as soon as I said that, I said, Lord, help me to forgive my wife. Take care of her. Bless her, Lord. And then and other thoughts kept coming. Thoughts of suicide kept coming to me. And as soon as I realized that, I said, Lord, forgive me, help me through this. And these thoughts kept coming all the time, and I kept thinking of my wife. She's going to really pay for doing this. And then I kept asking God to forgive me for thinking that way, and to help bless my wife, and take care of her, and to help me love my wife. And anyway, I finally went over the telephone. I called the prayer group leader, and I told her that my wife was voicing me, and she's away, and we talked for a little while. And I know I was so depressed I could hardly talk. And she says, "Are you going to be all right?" And I lied, and I said, "Yes, I'll be all right." But I just lied to her because I figured I took about enough of her time. I didn't want her to take up any more of her time. She says, "Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. As soon as I hang up, I'm going to call some of the people in our group, and we're going to pray for you." And I said, "Oh, thank you." And I went back to the living room and sat down, just sat there like a zombie. But after about an hour or so, I started getting better and better. And after a while, after about an hour and a half, I felt almost back to normal. And I didn't need that beer any longer, but I already had it opened up, and I felt, well, waste not, what not, so I drank it anyway. And I knew I had to go to work the next day. So, even went to bed at my regular time. And then I started praying, which I always do at night, and I couldn't stop praising God. I could not stop praising God. And I kept thanking God and praising Him and worshiping Him. And I don't know how long, I prayed for quite a while. I don't know how long I prayed, but I could not stop praising God. And the more I praised God, the more joy would come into me. The more joy would come to me, the more I praised God. And it would just go on and on and on and on. And I knew I had to get some sleep sometime that night, but I could not stop praising God. And all the time I was praising God, more and more joy was coming into me. I was filled with God's joy and peace. Eventually, after a long while, I felt like a balloon was all blown up. A balloon that was all blown up, and and you blow a balloon up, and you can't hold any more air. If you could give one little more puff, it'll burst. Well, that's the way I felt like. I was so full of joy that I was singing out loud and praising God. I couldn't hold any more joy. I knew I couldn't hold it anymore. And all of a sudden, I felt tremendous pain inside me. I said, "Lord, no more." And it stopped. I said, "Lord, I want to go to sleep now." And I went to sleep. That very night, when I came home, I've never felt so much pain in my life. Never felt so much joy in my whole life as that one night. Because God was with me. Even though it took me a long time to get around to Him, God watched over me and brought me closer to me all these years. And all the times I was going to church, and all the times I was going through the motions, because of the sacraments, God's drawn me closer to Him. But I'll give you a little secret. When you go to Mass and you go to the sacraments, open up your heart to God. So many people even go to Mass every day, and their heart is still as hard as rock. Why is that? Because they don't talk to God. They don't open their hearts to God. When I go to receive Jesus, I talk to Him. Said, "Lord, do whatever You have to me to transform me. I love You, Jesus. I need You. Thank You for what You've done for me." And I would go on and on and on, praising Him and talking to Him. A lot of people, they just go dilly-bob up and get the host and dilly-bob back, and that's it. They receive nothing. If you want to be transformed, if you want the sacraments to have an effect on you, open your heart to God when you receive Him. And you will notice changes in you. Anyway, I remember another night. I had with my two oldest kids with me when they were still very, very, very young. I had two oldest kids with me.
Give it about 3 minutes.
And anyway, I was bringing them home because I lived in my apartment for 5 years. And all those 5 years, I never went on a date. And all those 5 years, I went to daily Mass because this other church, they had daily Mass in the evening. So I went to daily Mass, and and I fasted once a week on just water alone. And I was getting closer to God. anyway, I never went on a date for 5 years because I knew I was still married. In my heart, I knew there's no such thing as divorce, so I never went on dates. But anyway, I wanted to make that clear. But anyway, I had my children, my two oldest children somewhere. They were still very young, and I was taking them home. And as I was on my way home, I stopped at Center Street, Marshalltown. And as I looked around, and I didn't see any car coming, and I drove on. It's 4-lane, one lanes one way, 2 lanes the other way. As I was going up the lane, and the car zipped right by me a few seconds after I got on the lane, and he honked his horn, and he makes some signs with his hand, which I don't want to go into. And about 2 blocks up, there was a stoplight, and he pulled over on the gravel road on the side there. And of course, I had to turn at the stoplight also. I had to turn right in that there. And I went, as soon as I come close to the stop line, it turned yellow, so I stopped. And this guy was just chewing me out. This guy was chewing me up one side, down the other. It was just chewing me out. He was mad. This guy was just angry and just, anyway, I kept thinking, I can't believe I can't believe the peace I have. If this was happening just a few years early, I'd be out there doing it out with him. But I was completely at peace. I was completely at peace. And of course, this was summertime, and we had all our windows down. And I kept thinking, I can't believe how powerful God's grace is. I can't believe how powerful the grace of God is. That I'm completely at peace with this. And after a while, I told my daughter Marlene, roll up your window. This guy starts repeating himself. So he rolled up, and this guy really got mad. He really got angry. I don't know if he was just trying to impress his girlfriend with him or what was wrong with him. But anyway, just about that time, that the light changed. You got another tape?
Yeah, we got about 30 seconds. Go ahead.
I got to have near enough time. But anyway, the light changed to green, and I turned around the corner to go the other way. And as I turned around the corner, this kid drove in front of me like this. And so I turned around, went around again. He went around in front of me again. This happened 3 times. Third time that happened, I lost it all. I lost it all. It's just like God pulled His grace from me. All of a sudden, I was ferociously mad. I can't explain it. I can't explain it. All I wanted to do was beat this guy to the pulp. That's all I wanted to do. I was so angry, I couldn't even control myself. I didn't care if the kids seen me or not. All I wanted to do is, I said, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to take off again. This guy's going to put his car in front of mine, and I'm going to step on the gas and ram his car, and I'm going to jump out of the car, and we're going to have it out. I knew this. I was going to do that. I had my mind on it. This is what it's going to do. So I went around him again, and he went around me like this, but instead of stopping, he drove off. And I said, should have hit him. I should have hit him. And then I said, Lord, forgive me. Put forgiveness in my heart for him, and help him to forgive me. Bless this man, bless this person, and draw him close to you. And for a whole week this went on. Whether I was at home, at work, and several times a day this incident came up. And the first thing that Marshalltown was at. Anyway, as soon as I got to the hospital, I went to the desk, the floor where he was on, and the nurse says, go right in. He's not going to be around much longer. He's not going to be around long. Go on right on in. So I went in there, and when I looked at him, he was all white. And his eyeballs was rolled clear up to his head. I'd never seen anybody like that. I could barely see the outline of the bottom of his eyeballs on top of it, his eyes there. His eyeballs were completely rolled up back, and he was completely white. And I put my hand on his shoulder. I started praying for him. I started just praying for his salvation. Also praying for God to heal him. Even at that time, I was still praying for his healing. And also, but primarily what I was praying for his salvation. And then I stopped to talk to him and said, Dad, I talked to him about Jesus. I said, Dad, give your life to God. Give your life to Jesus. Nothing else matters. Nothing else matters. Turn your life over to Him. I don't know how long I prayed. I prayed for him for quite a while. 3 different times I stopped to talk to him about Jesus. And after quite a while, I looked around, and there was Mom and my sister. They come in, they're standing in front of his bed. I was also there. And all the time I was praying for him. I was talking about Jesus. He was getting better and better and better. and the nurse came in. Now, I'm not making this up. She went into a state of shock. She looked at the gauges, looked at the monitors, she looked at this and that, and she was actually in shock. And she was actually what she actually says. What went on here? What went on here? What did you guys do? What did you guys do? What went on in here? You know, and she was. You can tell. She was. I don't know if she was angry or what, but she was not herself. And she was. Then she was in shock, you know, and just says, "You guys might as well go home. These are almost back to normal now." So, anyway, we all went home. 3 weeks later, I got a call. He died.
Your stepfather.
Stepfather. Did I say father? I said stepfather. Well, I call him Dad. Anyway, but I really believe in those 3 weeks, God spoke to his heart. And I really believe he heard me when I told him about Jesus. And I believe he heard me when I told him about that nothing else in this world matters but Jesus. And God worked for him for 3 weeks till he was ready. And God took him home. Because why else would God do this? I didn't heal him. I have no power to heal anybody. God is one reached down and brought him back and healed him for 3 weeks. And why would he do that for 3 weeks? No, there's no doubt in my mind that God touched his heart. And for 3 weeks when he was in this state, God was speaking to him. And God was transforming him. And I know he turned his life over to God. Anyway, after about five years, my wife wanted me back to live in the house again. And
what brought her back?
Huh?
What brought your wife back?
No, my wife, she moved back to the house. All the time I was living in my apartment, because I moved the house from my apartment pretty quick across town, and she moved back to the house, her and the kids. Anyway, after about 5 years, we decided that this was too much of a financial strain on us. She wanted me back to live with her. So I went back to live with her. When I say I went in to live with her, I must understand, I still consider myself married, because in my mind we were still married, and knowing in God's mind we were still married. So we knew we were still married, you know. But then after about another 7 years, we got married again. Married again for secular reasons, sort of for you know, for the state would know to be married, you know, for secular reasons. But anyway, but also just before I moved back home, I used to work a lot of overtime at times to make ends meet, because I used to give her all the extra money I had to help her along. And anyway, one time I worked overtime. I had about a half an hour left. And I always wanted to give Caesar what is Caesar's. I always try to do a good job for the company, whether everybody watching me or not. I always try to do a good job. And remember, there was hardly anybody in the shop when I was working overtime, and I had half an hour left before 8 o'clock, which was usually when I went home. I figured, well, I have time for more fast jobs. So I looked at the chart that was hanging there, and this one shock was wrote being bad. So I ran over to the store and got a shock. And you know, those railroad shocks are not like the car shocks or truck shocks. Those are huge and heavy. Okay? Those are big shocks. Now, ran over and got a shock, and I brought it back, and because I was in such a hurry, I didn't look how this one was mounted. This shock was mounted differently than all the other shocks that I've ever changed before. And then in my hurry, I didn't look at it, and when I took the last bolt out, the shock dropped out, and so I smashed my finger. It completely and utterly smashed my finger. And I knew, of course I was wearing gloves, but I knew I was hurt. Right away, with my other hand, I put my tools away, went to the office and said, I smashed my finger. And they took my glove off me, and it was all smashed, all tore up. And they took me to the emergency room in the hospital. And the doctor looked at it and x-rayed it. And the doctor come into the room and says, you know, I looked at your x-rays, and your finger's completely smashed. I called in a bone specialist, and I called in a surgeon. You're going to have to operate on that finger. So then he left. And all the time he was gone, I prayed. Because I was kind of a sissy cat, you know. I said, Lord, I pray I will not need to have an operation. Lord, I pray I will not need any stitches. And the third thing I prayed for, Lord, I pray I will not lose my fingernail. So I kept praying that all the time he was gone. When he came back, he says, the surgeon and the bone specialist looked at my finger, And the bone surgeon says, well, you know, it's strange, but all your fingers, you have several breaks, but they're all together yet, so we don't need to operate. And the surgeon says, I don't want to stitch it up, because when you stitch it up, sometimes you might get infections. So just they have the doctor to put the tape all over it, you know. And I said, thank you, Lord. So, but after a few weeks, I did lose my fingernail, but at that time, underneath my fingernail, it was kind of hard, you know, and it wasn't tender and sensitive anymore. So it didn't make that much difference. But again, the Lord answered my prayer, and I had confidence in Him, you know, I had faith that He would heal me. Now, God doesn't always work that way, you know, but at times He does, you know, and God is with us every moment of the day. And if you give your life to God and live for Him, He will not disappoint you. You will find peace and joy that the world cannot supply. That this world has nothing to offer that can possibly compare to the peace you get from turning your life over to God. I mean, it can't explain it. It can't explain it. All the world has to offer is short-term I don't know how to explain it, but that nothing lasting in this world that the world has to offer. That's all I have time for right now.